Careful, she's German, she might offend you. She's German, so at least she's gonna give it to you straight. She's German, so you know you're gonna get an honest answer from her. Growing up and living in Germany for most of my life, I actually never really thought about how Germans are perceived, and I never really thought much about the stereotype or this idea that Germans are rude or too serious or kind of cold. But now that I live in the US, I've heard this multiple times, and what's interesting is when I travel back to Germany with my American husband, he usually makes a comment or two alluding to the fact that Germans don't seem to be that friendly. And I didn't necessarily think I would say this, but I kind of understand where he's coming from. So in this video, I wanted to unpack this idea a little bit that Germans sometimes seem rude, especially to Americans. Also, disclaimer, I know that not all Americans think that all Germans are rude, but I have made specific observations in both countries that made me kind of understand why some Americans might think that. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Hi there, my name is Indra, and about 2 years ago, I moved from Germany to the state of Idaho, where I now live with my American husband, Chandler. Now, this is a topic I'm so excited to talk about because when I went back to Germany over Christmas, I actually felt like, Germans do seem a little bit cold and a little bit rude. So I wanted to dig deeper and really try and understand why I think that now that I live in the US. What it really comes down to is that Americans and Germans have really different communication styles, and they can seem very confusing and they can be very easily misinterpreted from the other perspective. Observation number 1, Germans have a communication hierarchy, but Americans don't. What I mean when I say Germans have a communication hierarchy is that Germans actually have different words and specifically different pronouns that they use based on who they're talking to. I am addressing someone that I don't know, so I'm talking to a stranger, specifically a stranger that is older than me, or I'm talking to a figure of respect like a professor or a boss. I am going to use the formal pronoun sie. And this formal pronoun indicates that there is some sort of distance and that there is some sort of hierarchy between me and the person that I'm talking to. Now, when I talk to people I actually know, like friends, family, or also people who are my age, like I think especially if you're like under 30, I would say you're more likely to use this informal pronoun even though you don't know the person, then you would use the pronoun du. So Germans already have this verbal indicator that basically tells you what the relationship is between the two people that are talking. But I would argue that distinction runs a level deeper, and it actually lets you predict the length and intensity of a conversation you'll have with someone. So let's say I'm at the grocery store checkout in Germany. Most likely, I actually don't know the cashier. Now, especially if that cashier is also older, I would, if I had to address them with a pronoun, I would use the formal pronoun. But that also means I'm probably not even going to have a conversation with that person, because to me, that person is a stranger, and to them, I'm also a stranger. And in Germany, that means there is no need to really talk to each other. So a normal conversation at the grocery store checkout will go like this. Hello, hello. Beep, 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 beep. 24.49. Chirp. Bye. Bye. So I have a very, very good idea how this conversation is going to go with a person based on how I would address them. Now, if I run into someone that I actually know very well at the grocery store, and I would obviously address them with the informal pronoun, chances are we might actually have a real conversation. Or if we're super busy and we can't have a conversation, we would at least address the fact that we're busy and we can't have a conversation right now. Or option 3, we might literally schedule a time to hang out and have a conversation. So based on this verbal hierarchy, I know what a conversation is going to look like. Now, when I'm in the US, I have no idea how a conversation is going to go with someone. First of all, you don't have that distinction between a stranger or a figure of respect and a person that you know. You address everyone the same way and everyone's just you. I, as a German, am usually very confused because I have no idea. Am I going to have small talk with the cashier at the grocery store? Some of them, especially if you go to Trader Joe's, are very talkative. They probably, I would assume, have to make conversation with you. That's probably part of their business model. But in the US, I don't know, like I'll run into my husband's colleague that I've seen maybe 2 times and we'll have small talk.
Cringe.
So in the US, I just really struggle to predict how a conversation is going to go based on how well I know a person. And I think that's because Americans, or specifically also the English language, is just way more informal and doesn't have a verbal hierarchy. Now, if you're an American in Germany, I could see how this could be very confusing for you, and you might then think that Germans are being like really short, or they're being kind of cold, like, oh, they're not asking you any questions. Most likely that is because in their head, you're a stranger and they are a stranger to you. They would, if they spoke German with you, probably address you in a formal way. Therefore, they don't feel the need to have small talk. So this hierarchy in the German language kind of eliminates small talk in most situations. Observation number 2, Germans are honest, but Americans are nice. This is another thing when I traveled back to Germany over Christmas. I was like, wait, I can't believe Germans are like this sometimes. Germans have this thing, especially older generation, like boomers or like if you're retired, these people just like do not give in Germany, like period. There's this thing where Germans genuinely do not have a problem communicating their honest, raw emotions out loud in a public setting. And I don't mean like the typical like Karen, loud and yelling and getting into arguments with the manager, but more like very small things that irritate them. They will address those out loud. My favorite example, again, the German grocery store. A lot of things go down at the German grocery store. If you've been to a German grocery store and the line at checkout is super long, there is a 99.9% chance that an older German person is going to yell, hey, können Sie meine neue Kasse aufmachen? Which basically just means, hey, can you open up another checkout? Because in this moment, they feel annoyed that they have to wait this long at checkout and they feel like things aren't, moving fast enough. So they're gonna make their feelings known. In the US, I've genuinely never heard anyone say this. I've never heard anyone yell from the back of the line, excuse me, can you open up another checkout, please? If you've ever experienced this in the US, please let me know because I've genuinely never heard anyone say this. Another example is when two people are approaching checkout kind of at the same time. Usually in Germany, what can happen is that one person will actually say, if one person's slightly in front, sorry, I was in front, to let the other person know that they should get behind them. But in the US, what I've observed is when two people approach the checkout at the same time and one person's slightly in front, usually both people will stop and look at each other and acknowledge each other and be like, do you want to go ahead? So both people will offer to the other person to go ahead. There is research on this that shows that Germans are just more comfortable being honest in negative situations and expressing negativity and acknowledging negativity. But Americans, in comparison, are less comfortable addressing negativity. However, I will say that Americans sometimes, in my opinion, take it a little bit too far with their friendliness. And I think this is where the accusation often comes in, especially from Germans, that Americans are being fake nice. And an example of that is the typical, hi, how are you? Or ending a conversation with, oh my gosh, we should totally hang out sometime. And they never follow up anyways.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine.
Americans, I feel like sometimes go out of their way to frame a conversation in a very, very positive light and leave the other person feeling very, very comfortable, but they don't necessarily always mean exactly what they're saying. So to wrap up this segment, Germans are just more comfortable expressing negativity. So it might seem like Germans are complaining a lot, especially about minor things.
Da sich auf die Glasfaser und sich drauf.
That's because they're just comfortable saying that they're uncomfortable versus Americans are more likely to try and make a situation into something positive. Let's move on to observation number 3. The Germans are realists while Americans are optimists. When I was talking to my American friends about, getting my first job in the US, usually the response was the same across the board. And everyone was like, oh my gosh, that's so exciting. Congratulations, that's amazing. And they were asking, what are you looking for in a job? What do you love doing? What kind of job would you like to have? What kind of money would you want to make? All of these fairly positive questions. Now, my German friends and family, when I was talking to them about, I'm getting my first job in the US, they were saying things like, wow, so you're gonna have a full-time job? Oh, that's gonna be stressful. You're gonna have less free time. How is that? What's the health insurance situation in the US? Oh, the US doesn't have really good labor laws. Aren't you worried that you have no job security? And at first I was like, excuse me, are you trying to make me feel terrible about this? I kind of wanted people to be excited for me. Based on the uncertainty avoidance index, it makes total sense that Germans and Americans would react really differently to the same information. Because what the uncertainty avoidance index measured was how comfortable different people in different cultures are with vagueness and ambiguity and ultimately uncertainty. Germany scored about 20 points higher on the uncertainty avoidance index, which means Germans are more likely to try and avoid uncertainty. According to this study, it basically means that Germans have higher risk awareness, are more likely to plan things, and are also more likely to address problems really early in a situation. Americans, on the other hand, are more comfortable in ambiguity. They're just more optimistic in general, and they also focus more on embracing and maximizing opportunity as compared to Germans who are more likely to look at the downsides of an opportunity. So then at first I was also thinking why are my German friends and family being so pessimistic about this? And it took me a while to kind of get used to it again and realize that, oh no, they're just kind of identifying the risks and the potential problems, and Americans are just more excited about the opportunity. That does mean Germans are more likely to talk about the negative aspects of a situation versus Americans might be more likely to talk about the positives of that situation. So as a German living in the US and having experienced both communication styles, I can understand why Americans might potentially think that Germans are being rude or cold or too serious. I also understand why Germans might sometimes look at Americans and think, wow, they're being kind of like fake and they're being way too nice. That can't be genuine either.
Side eye.
And it really comes down to the context and the communication style in each culture. At the end of the day, that does mean Germans aren't actually rude, but I also understand that if you have an American communication style, you might think that Germans are kind of rude. When Germans really just have a clear verbal structure, they are comfortable being honest in negative situations, and ultimately they like to identify problems early, which might seem like they only talk about negative things. And then you have Americans, on the other hand, who use a more informal style of speaking, are less comfortable with negativity, and are focusing a lot more on opportunities versus risk. So I hope I was able to kind of break down the stereotype and explain the different communication styles in the two different cultures. Again, not saying all Americans are like this and all Germans are like this, but I do think that there is a clear tendency and a clear difference in the two communication styles. Let me know if you ever thought that Germans were being kind of rude or cold, and also if you ever thought Americans were being fake nice. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel.
Slay.
And I want to see you again very, very soon in my next video. Bye.